This is going to be my first attempt at making a video for YouTube. I'm going to talk today about Adobe Lightroom that is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud package. Adobe Lightroom is the quintessential program for editing photos. I was very slow to give it a try at all. I didn't like the idea of having to go onto a monthly subscription. I've used tools like paint.net before, and while they work okay for their basic stuff, they really weren't great for touching up photos. They were great for cropping and the like. But a friend took some of my photos that really needed some work on lighting and the like, and he was able to touch them up in such short order that it just sold me on it. So you can go and download a 7-day free trial of Adobe Creative Cloud, Adobe Lightroom, and you have to give your credit card, but as long as you cancel before the 7-day period is up, you will not get charged. So it's very little risk to give it a try and see if you like it. The user interface and how Lightroom works is quite different than other programs. In that the way Lightroom works is you suck photos into Lightroom, you edit them, they exist within Lightroom, they don't touch the original version of the photo that you're editing, and then you export it out to allow you to be able to save that edited version, as well as to be able to export it for things like uploading to Facebook, and allowing you to add even simple watermarks. And we'll talk about some of the watermark features on another day. But today we're just going to get into a very basic discussion of how Lightroom works. So download it, install it. I'm not going to cover that here. I'm going to assume that you can figure that out on your own. There's basically two parts to Lightroom. The first is an overbearing piece of software called Creative Cloud, which you see there on the screen, Creative Cloud Desktop. Creative Cloud then lets you turn around and download your versions that you require. As you can see, I have Lightroom, Photoshop, and then a RAW editor. RAW is a format that your camera can store with that has much better quality and much better editability than if you just save the JPEG. Photoshop is a very elaborate, complex, all-involved editing software. We're not going to touch that today. We're going to touch Lightroom. There are two versions of Lightroom, Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Creative Cloud. I prefer Creative Cloud. I think it's just a little bit easier to use and it's a little bit more glossy. So Lightroom Creative Cloud is what we're going to talk about here. But I will highlight one thing. When you buy Adobe Creative Cloud, you actually get some web storage in the Adobe Cloud. Personally, I wasn't interested in that. So one of the first things I did was I went ahead and disabled the syncing. And you can see that here in the preferences where I've currently turned that off. In the initial starting of the settings, you can see just how much cloud storage you have. I have 20 gig. As you can see, it started uploading my photos without me even knowing. I don't like that, so I'll be going back to delete them. But you can disable this when you first get started. Once Creative Cloud is downloaded, then you can download Lightroom Creative Cloud version, and you're now ready to start editing. Creative Cloud itself updates reasonably frequently and is reasonably large. Lightroom updates a little less frequently and is also quite large. So you're talking about, it's almost a gig for Lightroom, and Creative Cloud itself is about 500 meg. So what that means is you're going to need a reasonable amount of bandwidth to be able to download it, and it's going to take some time to download. So you can see here there's Lightroom 1.33 gig, and there's Creative Cloud at about 500 gig. So between the two, you're almost 2 gig worth of data that you're going to need to download to get started with Lightroom. Okay, so we're going to get started with Lightroom. We are going to go ahead and start Lightroom, and then we're going to add a photo which pulls the photo into Lightroom, remembering that the original is not touched. So review for import, import the photo into Lightroom, pulls the photo into Lightroom, and there we are ready to start doing our work. As you can already see in the photo, it's quite overexposed. There's a lot of white to it. There isn't a lot of contrast coming out on the bird. So those are the things that are very easy to correct on Lightroom. And this is a perfect example of how you can work with it. So the first thing we're going to do is go into edit, although quite often the first thing you'll do is crop. So we'll go back and actually crop it first. So we'll pull the edges of the photo in so that it's properly centered. Some of the noise on the outside is taken off, so that's cropped. I double-clicked to apply the crop. Now we're going to come in. I pulled in a raw image. Raw images are a lot easier to work with from an editing point of view, and there's a lot more you can do to them, so I recommend raw if you can. Within raw, you can also do correction for things like lens aberrations or imperfections. So you go into here, you say enable lens. We're going to come into here. My lens is a Sigma, so I'm going to go ahead and select the Sigma. It knows exactly what the lens is once it's there. Sometimes it'll automatically detect the lens. My Canon properly detects the lens. This it does not. We're going to go in here and we're going to start by pulling the exposure. If you're not sure what to do, you can just press auto and see what it does. And there's what it's done. You can see it's really overdone the photo. So I re-clicked auto and it undid the settings. But one of the things that clicking auto can do is you can see what it thinks you want to do. So it's thinking you want to decrease the exposure, which I agree with, increase the contrast, which I agree with. It's really blown down the highlights, so I don't know what to say about that. But anyways, let's go ahead and undo the auto. Now let's pull down the exposure, and you can see the over whitening is already going away. So I'll just stop there just because I don't like it overly done, and then I'm going to bring up the contrast. And you can see already, based on what was there, how much better a photo this is. And exactly how much you want to brighten it and lighten it is really up to you. But you can see how easy it was to brighten to dial down the exposure and increase the contrast and basically correct what was not great about that photo. These are the easiest things to do within Lightroom: exposure, contrast, and highlights. You can pick on individual colors. There's other much more detailed stuff you can do to edit it. I won't go into those here. So the next thing you can do is to add a keyword to the image. A keyword allows you to search for that image within Lightroom, and then when it's exported, you can search for that keyword as well. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and start typing. Brown-headed cowbird is what this bird is. You can see I've already entered it once, so it pulled it up for me. So I'll add it. You can see the bird is there now. Within Lightroom, you can say search, and you can say keyword, and then you can find the brown-headed cowbird, and this will now show you every brown-headed cowbird that you've ever edited within Lightroom. This is only showing me today's, but that's one of the great things you can do with Lightroom, is to add keywords to make it easier for you to be able to find them, sort them, edit them. From here, we're now ready to export. So we're going to do photo, and we're going to do file export. From here, you have a number of options that you can choose as part of your export. If you're saving it, I'd recommend you use full size and full quality. If you are trying to use it for things like social media, you're probably going to want to include a watermark. You may want to decrease the size, and you may want to decrease the quality just to make it easier to upload it, as well as to protect your image content. Within the watermarks, you can go in here and you can see you can have simple text watermarks. You can have a graphic. I used a site that allowed me to create a signature, which is what you see down in the bottom corner there. But that's up to you as to what you want to do in terms of a watermark. We're going to come back here. We're going to save it for saving, and we're going to do 100%. We're going to do not include the watermark. Then we say export photo. Then it simply asks you where you want to save it. Once that's done, you've now taken, you've exported, you've labeled your photo, and you're good to go. Let me just export it, 1 second. And you can queue these up. You can have multiple exports running. You can have an export running at the same time as an import is running. And once it's exported, there it's done. Sorry, that took a second. We're going to go find the photo where I put it. And there's the photo. And if you look here in the details, you can see there's that tag. And within Windows, if you were to use the search feature within Windows, you can search on that tag. So you could find out every photo that had previously been labeled with that tag. And with that, that's a very easy introduction to what you can do in Lightroom.